Hey, it's that time again. Time for another episode of Shelve It or Shove It, the completely superficial way to pick books for your TBR based solely on their covers. I'm your host, Daisy X Machina, the speculative detective, where I investigate all things science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I'll be looking at young adult fantasy and science fiction new releases on Goodreads for the month of May to add at least one book to my TBR in June. So let's get started with young adult. First up is Lying in the Deep by Diana Urban. The perfect escape could be the perfect murder. So I think this is a thriller on the high seas. Maybe it's a cruise ship. I don't know, but there is a porthole with a handprint of blood. The cover for me is a little bit generic, but I can tell what the story is about. I think murder on the high seas, and unfortunately, I'm just not in the mood of this type of book. And the cover, it doesn't go over and beyond what it would need to do for me to pick a young adult thriller, so I am going to have to shove it. Next up, Warrior Girl Unearthed by Angeline Boulley, from the best-selling author of Firekeeper's Daughter. Now, I've heard of Firekeeper's Daughter, but I haven't read it yet. I wonder if this is a sequel. I don't think this is a sequel. I like the artwork. Actually, I like the artwork quite a bit. It's unusual. I like the person's face, and there's sort of silhouettes on either side, and then it looks like these animals coming up around them. Warrior Girl Unearthed. I like the background too. There's a handprint. It's mostly, it looks like there's the phases of a moon. There's a lot going on in this cover, and it's all working, at least for me. So I'm going to go ahead and shelve it. Next up is Girls Like Girls by Haley Kiyoko. And I think we can tell by the title, this is going to be a lesbian romance. One girl learns to accept the love she fears the most. Oh, coming out stories. Not my favorite LGBTQI plus story. The covers, it looks really dated, doesn't it? It looks like something from the 50s. I'm not into young adult romance or romance in general. And the cover is not doing it at all for me. So I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is Ander and Santi Were Here by Johnny Garza Villa. And it's another young adult romance, but I like this cover a lot more than the previous one. I like the artwork. I think these are two guys. They could be non-binary. I don't know. I like this type of illustration, but again, I don't really do young adult romance, so I'm going to have to shove it. And finally, in young adult, it is Cherish by Tracy Wolff. Boring. Another boring, dumb cover. I mean, it's a crown. There's a little bit of blood on it. There's a drip of blood off the R in Cherish. Says Into the Shadows. Maybe this is Vampire. I don't like this cover. It's way too basic for me. I'm going to, the reflection of the crown is nice, but it's not enough for me. So I'm going to go ahead and have to shove it. Now we move on to science fiction, and first up is The Ferryman by Justin Cronin. Author of The Passage, haven't read that, don't recognize this author, and this cover is not doing him any favors. It's as generic as they come. There's a sky, and there's a ship way off on the horizon. This is science fiction. Okay, so maybe the ship is a little ferry, maybe. It's not giving me anything of what this book could be about. I'm going to go ahead and have to shove it. Next up is Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. Apologies if I am mispronouncing that. Author of Friday Black. And there's this little circle that says read with Jenna. I don't know what that means. Someone tell me down in the comments what it means. Anyway, there is this illustration of, it looks like a scythe or a sickle that a Grim Reaper has. Chain Gang is a prison gang. All Stars, I keep thinking of Drag Race All Stars. Can't be the same. Well, this is a television show. The illustration's okay, but science fiction, Chain Gang? I don't know what this could be about. Maybe something about the Grim Reaper? I don't know. I'm going to have to go ahead and shove it. Next up is The Endless Vessel by Charles Soule, a New York Times bestselling author who I haven't heard of. What else is new? I like the illustration. I like the trees. It looks like some type of hypnotic pattern. It's very stylized. Endless Vessel. I'm not sure what this could be about. Is it a spaceship? But there's trees. Is it AI or internet or virtual reality? I don't know. I'm going to have to go ahead and shove it. Next up is Fractal Noise by Christopher Paolini. Now, this is the guy that wrote the Aragon series when he was like 16 years old, and I thought was a decent middle grade fantasy series, or was it young adult? I think it was middle grade. And I was always very impressed because of how young he was, but now he's an adult, so I'm always been a little bit curious of how he's evolved as a writer. Now, this says a fractal verse novel, and I'm wondering if it's a sequel. I don't know. I haven't read any of his adult stuff yet. And the cover itself is kind of interesting. There is this guy in his spaceship going into this tunnel. Fractal noise. So humans investigating some anomaly they found. It's a guess. The only thing I'm worried about is if it's a sequel, or if he just has this Fractalverse universe that he writes different stories in, like Larry Niven and Known Space. Anyway, gosh, I really do want to read something by Paolini. Maybe this is my chance. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and shelve it. I am so excited about this next one, Lords of Uncreation by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which I hope is the final Architect series conclusion, which I'll for the first two, so I've been waiting for this one, and I think it is based on this cover because there's a planet blowing up, and it says in the deep cold of space Leviathan stirs, which is, if you haven't read the stories, a lot of it involves sort of what is hyperspace and what's hidden in there and lives in there. Anyway, I am really wanting to read the conclusion, and if this is what it is, which I'm pretty sure it is, I'm going to have to shelve it. Now we move on to fantasy, and first up is Martha Wells' Witch King. Martha Wells wrote the Murderbot Diaries, which everyone seems to love, including me, and she also wrote something called The Fall of Ilrien, which is this fantasy sci-fi series, which I really enjoyed. There's a recommendation by N.K. Jemisin. However, this cover is very dark and it looks kind of generic. I mean, it's a well-produced illustration. It just says Witch King on it, so I guess we're looking at the Witch King. And gosh, the cover just isn't giving me anything. I'm gonna have to shove it. Next up is Deep as the Sky, Red as the Sea by Rita Chang Epic. Okay, so it's an interesting cover. It's very Asian because it has sort of that Japanese print on the waves, and there's this, I'm guessing, Asian, almost cartoon features superimposed over it. There's a little junk ship riding the waves. Oh gosh. I don't know. I think I would not even pick this up based on this cover, so I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is Atlanta by Jennifer Saint, author of Electra. So just because I know the author and the Electra, I'm going to assume this is another Greek myth retelling of a character called Atalanta. Maybe that's what the Atlantic Ocean is named after. The cover's okay. It's sort of a silhouette of I'm going to assume, Greek woman with a bow and arrow. So I'm just not in the mood for this one. It's not really popping to tell me it's an unusual story, so I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is Clytemnestra by Costanza Casati. I'm going to assume it's another Greek myth retelling because I recognize the name Clytemnestra, but it's not popping up in my mind exactly what it is. I believe a queen, at least by the image on the cover. Not really pulling me in, and I'm really not in the mood for another Greek retelling. So I'm going to have to shove it. Next up is The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. And this is a gorgeous, gorgeous cover, I think. Recommendation by George R.R. Martin, which isn't any small thing. Based on the title, and I assume this covers a library, maybe a magic book. I'm getting pulled in by a story about this magnificent looking library. I love it, so of course I'm going to have to shelve it. So it looks like Wolf shelved 4 books. One Young Adult, Warrior Girl Unearthed by Angeline Booley. 2 science fiction, Fractal Noise by Christopher Paolini and Adrian Tchaikovsky's Words of Uncreation, and 1 fantasy, The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. Now, right off the bat, I'm going to pull off the Words of Uncreation because I'm going to read that. Of course, I'm going to read that. This is the conclusion of a trilogy that I've really been enjoying, so of course I'm going to read it. But it's the 3rd book, and I've always said that Tchaikovsky's covers look a little bit space generic, even though we have a planet blowing up on this one. Okay, anyway, that leaves 3 books. I'm just going to go with the cover I love the most, as I usually do, and that's going to be The Book That Wouldn't Burn by Mark Lawrence. So we're going to read the blurb, and I've just opened up the Goodreads page to find out this is the first book in a series, which I'm not that happy about, but at least it's the first book, and we'll know whether we should continue with this series or not. But of course, you're going to have to wait a year or 2 for the next book to come out. Once again, I love this cover. I think this is a gorgeous, gorgeous cover, and I like the name of the title. So let's read the blurb. A boy has lived his whole life trapped within a vast library, older than empires and larger than cities. A girl has spent hers in a tiny settlement out on the dust, where nightmares stalk and no one goes. The world has never even noticed them. That's about to change. Their stories spiral around each other across worlds and time. This is a tale of truth and lies and hearts and the blurring of one into another. A journey on which knowledge erodes certainty and on which, though the pen may be mightier than the sword, blood will be spilled and cities burned. Okay, I'm still not quite sure what this is going to be about. A boy that lived his whole life in a vast library older than empires. I'm thinking of Piranesi. A girl lives in nightmares. Something's going to happen. And, it's reminding me a lot of the Millennium series by Trudy Canavan, which I have mixed feelings about, but it was interesting insofar as there was a man and a woman who had, we had two POVs, but their stories almost never intersected. And when you see a male and female POV, you almost think, well, they're going to eventually get together for a romance, but in the Millennium series, they never did. I have a feeling they probably will in this series, but who knows? It is so vague. What have I gotten myself into? Well, let me know down in the comments which books you would have picked based solely on their cover. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Until we meet again, may all the books you read be blessed.